continuing that as proof, I am excited to welcome from Arbitrum, Senior DevRel Engineer Relations, Mr. Ben Greenberg. Ben, come on up. Thank you for being here, man. A lot of power in this remote.
A lot of power.
Point to switch.
We're there. Good morning, everyone. It is so great to be here with you this morning at Sub0, which is one of my favorite events. Not my first Sub0, and hopefully not my last Sub0. I want to talk to you about a topic which, as was just demonstrated, it seems like everywhere. And I want to, in our few minutes together, propose a possible vision, articulate a possible path towards cross-chain interoperability. But in order to do that, we need to have a shared definition. We need to set the stage of where I think we're at right now, which is, we live in a world of a lot of chain proliferation. There are so many blockchains, and we celebrate the technical elegance and sophistication of each and every one of those chains. But from a user perspective, it can all feel like so much friction. What do users want to do? Users want to interact on the space they're most comfortable on. They want to interact on their phones. They want to accomplish things quickly and easily. And yet we've created all of this infrastructure that seems brilliant to us who are developers or builders, and we love to celebrate it, but it's just friction for the users. So in our time together, what I want to try and accomplish is some kind of vision that does two things at once, that elevates the sovereignty of every single chain to be unique, of every single chain to be self-sustaining, and at the same time, from within that sovereignty, to also find true cross-chain interoperability. But before we get there, I'm Ben. I work at Arbitrum Foundation, which supports the Arbitrum network. You can find me online everywhere at Hummus on Rails, old Ruby on Rails developer from a long time ago. And maybe most notably, and maybe most important for this venue, is I'm also a proud alum of the Polkadot Blockchain Academy. If you haven't done PBA, the PBA team is here. You should definitely speak to them. It was probably the most grueling experience a middle-aged man could ever do in their entire lives, but it was well worth it, and I did it actually here in Buenos Aires in the second cohort. I'm seeing more of Buenos Aires in the past few days than I saw when I lived here for 2.5 months for PBA, because all I saw was the classroom, my room, the classroom, my room, the classroom, my room. So it's an incredible experience. It feels a little bit like hazing, but don't worry, you will come out of it in ways that you will be so incredibly grateful for. So when we talk about building user experiences that leverage cross-chain interoperability, what we need to talk about is actually a conceptual, paradigmatic shift of, instead of only thinking or primarily thinking about protocols, we need to start thinking in the language of products. And this is not just a semantic change. It's actually a reshift in the way we build things. Because users, and all of us, if we're builders, we're also users sometimes, hopefully. We use the things we build. We, as users, don't interact with a sequencer. We don't interact with a consensus mechanism. We interact with a product. And as a user, you want to accomplish a thing, and you want it to get done, and you want to use products that get you there. So how do we build a cross-chain, and how do we build within our own chains that enable that to happen? And I think we do that in a three-tiered way that leads us to understanding the digital sovereignty of our spaces, that our digital spaces, our block space is sovereign, that our builders are sovereign in how they choose to build, and that ultimately, and most importantly, at the front and center, our users are sovereign as well. In Arbitrum, we call this to have a digital sovereign nation. And I want to spend a few minutes talking about what that means and how it imports and how it impacts what we talk about when we talk about interoperability. So to be a digital sovereign nation means that your economics and your governance are self-sustaining, are transparent, and are open, and that your technology stack enables and doesn't limit. But at the same time, being sovereign does not mean living alone on your own block space island. It doesn't mean that your chain is on its own beautiful tropical paradise, separated by vast distances of oceans from other chains. Rather, the opposite is true. A digitally sovereign block space, a digitally sovereign nation, is able, from its own ability to understand itself, to create true interop with other chains. That when you can sustain your own chain, when you've built the economic incentives that enable that to happen, then from that position, you can create true interop. And so there's the scaffolding for that ultimately rests on things like your constituents, your users become the owners. Your users are who you hold yourself to account to through transparent democratic DAO and governance. Your block space is open. Your virtual execution environments, your VM, is able to be flexible. And your economics are not only there to sustain what is, but to, more importantly, enable what could be. From an economic perspective, we call that the flywheel of growth, right? That your activity generates more revenue. The revenue pours into the treasury, which generates more activity, which generates more revenue, which generates more activity, in a continuous flywheel of not just perpetuating what currently exists as the status quo, but more importantly, enabling more and more future innovation. And just to give one small slice of an example of that, in recent months, starting in April of 2025, this year, we're still in 2025, we launched an order auction process to enable the users and builders who create systems that need fast transactions. So our sequencer is first in, right? But in order to, if you want to go ahead of what's first, you want to do that. And you're going to find a way to do that regardless of the systems we create. But what if you align your blockchain economics and the incentive model with what your users and your builders need? What happens then? Well, what happens is you reduce the spam, you enable maximal extractable value without reducing your throughput and increasing your latency. And we call this order auction process done by smart contracts time boost. And since it was launched in April, it's generated more than $4.5 million for the DAO from April to now. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, yesterday, breaking news, yesterday was the single biggest transaction day for this new initiative in the history of it since April, with launching, making tens of thousands of dollars, maybe $70-something thousand in one single day. And so this enables high throughput applications to find a path without increasing spam, with incentivizing in a way that benefits all users, those that need that and those that don't need that. Similarly, when we talk about economic sovereignty and building the mechanisms for that, we also need to talk about builder sovereignty, developer sovereignty. And this is something that I feel very strongly about. It has been all too long the case that if I want to build my application with the language stack that is most productive to me, I am by ipso facto limited in where I will deploy that. My choice of language, ironically, also is my limitation. My choice of VM is limited by my choice of language. But it doesn't have to be that way. And we know in this space in Polkadot, you know that's not the case. You were innovating in that for years. So what if you could have a WASM VM that, okay, we all know WASM here, but what if you could have a WASM VM that is co-equal to the EVM in the state root tree, that shares the exact same state tree, which means I can write, let's say, my cryptographically intense application code in Rust or C++ or Go, deploy that to my WASM VM, and call my Solidity contracts interoperably from the EVM inside my Rust code. What if I want to call my Rust code from my Solidity code? You can do that. That is enabling developer sovereignty without also introducing developer limitations. But this all leads us to, as I started with, it all leads us to ultimately the most important element, which is the users being the sovereign. And so users, they don't want to just do a transaction. All too often we think about what we do in our world, in our industry, as transactions. But users, the normies, when users are interacting with things, they want to accomplish something. They have an intention. They want to get something done. They want to buy those new Nikes when they drop. They want to do X, Y, or Z. They're not thinking in transactions and transacting. They're thinking in intentions. So we're building and hopefully launching at the end of next month what's called the Universal Intents Engine, built on top of the Open Intents Framework in partnership with the Open Intents Framework and with the team at Open Zeppelin, a universal intents layer that allows users to publish their intent, to have solvers compete to solve that intent, and then have it settled in fast finality within perhaps even close to under 5 seconds. Cross-chain, any chain. Built by Arbitrum, but usable by everyone. Because that's really cross-chain interoperability. And the way this works as a coordination layer for all chains is ultimately built on a 4-part stack. First of all, we have standardized architecture using emerging ERC standards that together compose the message and transport layer, which then communicates to a broadcast layer, and finally that goes out to an aggregation and solver market where solvers compete to fulfill that user intention, and then to fast finality on any chain that feels most appropriate. And the bit here that I think is absolutely brilliant, the bit that I think is really important, that ties into both developer sovereignty and user sovereignty, is developers can build pathways to give users the choice depending on their need. Well, what does that mean, Ben? Let me give you an example. Let's say a user needs to accomplish something like that high-throughput builder wants to be first in order a transaction. The user needs to accomplish that intention fast. And they care more about the speed than they necessarily care about the trust assumptions underlying that speed. You can have a more trusted pathway that's faster. Maybe you don't need it to be as fast, but you need it to be less trust built in. Less trust assumptions, more trustless. That path can also exist. And builders can build the applications on top of this intents engine that enables either way to happen for the user, giving users true sovereignty and the builders underlying that also true sovereignty, which leads us to a vision of the internet, a vision of the digital common that is no more beautiful, sophisticated, gorgeous walled gardens that are cut off from one another, but rather an interoperable mesh of networks, an interoperable mesh of digitally sovereign nations. And at that point, we stop thinking only about our own chain, but we start thinking what's possible cross-chain. So just taking that one step further, imagine a not-so-distant future where a user expresses their intent. They use X402, which we'll talk about in just a second, to pay for that with any chain, any token. They can assign that intent to an autonomous agent using Google's agent AP2 standard, agentic protocol payment standard, and then settle on any chain for fast finality. That's not a future that's happening next year. That's a future that could be happening next week, could be happening tomorrow. And so if you've been sleeping on crypto Twitter for the past couple of weeks, let me just briefly elucidate what X402 is in AP2. X402 makes the web natively payable by using the standards of the web. So a user, another machine, an agent can send a payment request, receive back from the server the metadata in that 402 response for the payment, and then execute the payment, making any API, any product, any service instantly monetizable. And along with that comes the AP2 standard, which coupled with that gives users the ability to cryptographically sign their intent over to an AI agent that then can pay using autonomous methods and instant payability with X402, so you can accomplish the user's desire without the user ever even needing to be at the keyboard. They sign over their intent cryptographically, their payment intent, their purchase intent, and then everything else is done for them. All autonomously, all conducted, fast, with minimized trust assumptions. Which leads us to not only talking about one interoperable digital nation conducting across a couple chains, but really a world where we start thinking about coordination that's at a civilization scale. A world where we start thinking about chains that are from within their own ability to sustain themselves, that are sovereign in their economics, sovereign in their government, sovereign in their builders, and yet can build the bridges that offer the path and flexibility of choice to their users to be able to transact, be able to accomplish what they want. Because when we build an interoperable digital nation in the vision that we're articulating, I want to close by actually saying something a little more, maybe a little more fundamental. Because what we're actually doing, and we can lose sight of this all too often, is we're returning back to the very fundamentals of why we're in this industry to begin with. I want to argue and posit that interop is not just about fast transactions. It's actually about restoring the user, restoring choice, restoring freedom, and restoring sovereignty to the user. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.